go ahead and get started. Thank you everyone for joining. This is the third attractions, and people are there for a lot of different reasons. And we want to make sure that however you're getting there, you're able to get there safely and access what you need. Another objective, to improve Georgetown streets and sidewalks to make them safer and more accessible. Maintain the historic character of the neighborhood, of course, very important in Georgetown, and then promote sustainable transportation options. So this is our project timeline. This is our final meeting, final virtual meeting. We are at the end of our timeline. We kicked off this project last spring with issues identification. We had our first public meeting in May of last year, and then throughout the fall, we did a lot of public outreach, both virtual and in person. And then later in the fall and in the winter, we did concept development. And then in March and April of this year, we presented the draft recommendations. We did another round of public outreach for the remaining rest of April. And then today we're presenting the final recommendations, and then we'll complete the study and produce the final study report next month. And throughout the project, we've been meeting with our community advisory committee, several of which I see on the call. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for your support throughout the project. It was a lot of important feedback that you all gave us. So I want to thank you all for your time, those of you who are on the call. And then we also had a number of stakeholder meetings, people reaching out to us via email through our website. So throughout the project, we were interacting with the community. This is a little bit of stats that show that throughout the project, we had over 4,200 individual comments that were received, over 2,000 surveys, over 1,300 project subscribers. Earlier in the project, we had a map where people could click and provide comments, and so those are location-based comments. We got over 400 comments from there. We met with our Citizens Advisory Committee, and that includes the ANC2E, the Georgetown BID, the Citizens Association of Georgetown, the Burley Citizens Association, the Georgetown University, the DC Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committees, and a number of other groups. Councilmember Pinto's office was also participated in that. So we had a lot of participation through those. We met with that group 9 times. We've had 5 public workshops. This is the 4th. Well, again, we'll have one tomorrow. 4 walking tours, both with some with our CAC, some with individual members, and then we've had 5 stakeholder workshops. So there's been a lot that we've done throughout this project to make sure that we're hearing from as many people as possible. So we'll go through a few. I know we'll go through question and answer at the end, but we just want to address some questions that many of you may have. How will the recommendations affect parking in Georgetown? Most of the recommendations will be implemented with no impact to existing parking, to existing curbside parking. There's a few, very few, that will result in repurposing of parking spaces, and we'll go through those when we get there to explain those to you so that you understand them, and happy to take questions. But for the most part, this study will have a very minimal impact on parking supply. And one recommendation actually adds parking. So most recommendations will have no impact on parking supply in Georgetown. Do the recommendations address bus and bicycle infrastructure? Both DDOT's bus teams and bicycle teams are on the verge of, well, our bus team has been going through a citywide update of the bus network, and they will be doing a bus priority plan in Georgetown the next fiscal year. So later this year or early next year, and they'll be looking at M in Wisconsin, which are the major streets in Georgetown. And the bus project will also advance multimodal improvements. So there could be bike improvements, sidewalk improvements. Just because it's a bus project doesn't mean that bus is the only thing that will be looked at. It will be another multimodal look at those streets. And then our bike team is going to be kicking off a strategic bike plan soon. So they're going to look at the entire city and the entire district and look at improvements to the bike network citywide. So you won't see any specific bus recommendations or bike recommendations in this project because they'll be rolling out in those upcoming projects. And we didn't want to get ahead of the good work that those teams are going to be doing. And then how will the study's recommendations be funded and implemented? As we go through the recommendations, you'll see a cost estimate for all of them. So we have an idea of how much everything will be. And then we do have $7.2 million funding that we can use to implement these projects. And what we can do with some of that funds is see what we can do to put in permanent materials. So construction to actually move curb lines where we can with some of these recommendations. So that's an update for you if you've been following the project. We've also heard a lot of out of scope items. A lot of there's a lot of things that we heard throughout this project that aren't going to be addressed through this project, but are addressed through other teams at DDOT or other DC government agencies. And I'll just kind of go through the main ones that we've heard. We've had some questions about large projects such as Metro Rail Station or the gondola or changes to a Whitehurst Freeway. Those projects are so big and complex that they would really need a project that just focuses on those. So you won't see anything like that in the recommendations that we'll be sharing with you today. Changes to existing legislation or policy. Those are things that are typically applied citywide. We typically don't do those things for just kind of one neighborhood at a time. If you won't see anything that's maintenance of existing infrastructure. If you see a maintenance issue, whether it's a sidewalk that needs repair or a sign that's down or something like that, we ask that you file a 311 request to address that issue. Enforcement requests, we know that there are some, especially some locations where there's really key enforcement problems. Those requests are best referred to the agencies that are responsible for enforcement. So that's the police department for traffic infractions, so somebody speeding, the DPW for parking enforcement, and then also DDOT's automated enforcement team for the traffic cameras. But we do recognize, and we have had some conversations about some of these, and we'll go through them when we get into individual recommendations. We know that some of these, some of them especially we've heard really need enforcement as part of it, and we'll talk about those and when we get to those individual recommendations. But we do recognize that enforcement is a key important thing for transportation safety. I'll go through some more. We've had some questions about electric vehicle infrastructure or curbside charging stations. DDOT has a program that is addressing those issues citywide. So again, that's another thing that's a citywide effort that we're working on. Requests to add more frequent or new bus services. We'd refer those requests to WMATA. Management of curbside parking. We'd refer you to DDOT's curbside management team, and we can help you follow up with them. And then expansion of the bike lane or trail network. That will be part of the upcoming strategic plan that will be rolling out soon. Okay, so I'll go through, at our last meeting, we shared draft recommendations, and then we also released a survey. So I'll go through kind of the highlights of what we heard from that survey, and also what we heard from the last round of public meetings, and also just the other engagement that we had between that last meeting and the meetings today and tomorrow. So for that survey, we got over 550 respondents. over half of them live in Georgetown. 31, so just under a third, work in Georgetown. And we recognize that resident feedback and resident support is crucially important. We want to hear from everybody, but we also recognize that residents live here and they deal with issues kind of the most in a lot of cases. So even though almost half of these were from people who don't live in the neighborhood, we did make sure that we were really listening to residents throughout that process. But most of the recommendations, 16 of 22, received majority support, and all recommendations received at least 43% support. So there was some level of support for all of these recommendations. So the top 5 priorities, we asked people to pick up to 3 recommendations, so the highest priorities, and these are the ones that came out on top. As we go through and implement, this is something that we'll definitely keep in mind as we implement, as far as which ones were the resident or the people who responded to the survey said that they thought were the most important. So M Street and Wisconsin Avenue, the intersection of the 2 busiest streets in the neighborhood, rose to the top. And then the Key Bridge ramp onto Whitehurst Freeway was another important one that came up. 28th and 27th, so the streets in East Georgetown. Bank Alley came up on this list. And then Wisconsin Reservoir and 33rd was another kind of intersection between major streets came up. And we should note that almost 30% of people did not respond to this question. So these are the top priorities. These are the lowest priorities. Just quickly, as a takeaway, I think these are intersections that less people probably interact with versus the previous list. You saw M, Wisconsin Reservoir, major streets. These are, for the most part, streets that are kind of more in the neighborhood. But these are the ones that came up. Not to say that these are any less important. There's certainly people that really want us to implement these. Somebody selected all of these, so that's something we'll keep in mind as we implement. We want to make sure that we are implementing things throughout the neighborhood and not just looking at one piece of it. So we also asked people which ones do they think should be changed or which ones do they have concerns about. And for the most part, these are all the ones that 20th and 29th, 20th, 27th, TS. For the most part, these are all ones where we, in the draft recommendations, we had one-way conversions as draft recommendations. We got a lot of, I'd say the single biggest theme that came through was concern about the one-way conversions that were proposed in the draft recommendations. And also this is, so this the ones that they think should be changed, and then the ones that people had concerns about. We had 2 separate questions. And these are the ones, again, it's 20th, 29th, TS, all the places where we proposed a one-way conversion. M in Wisconsin, a major intersection. So again, this reflects kind of concerns over the one-way conversions that we proposed. So again, that was the clearest theme that emerged from the outreach, both in the surveys, both in the public meetings we had last month, and then any other outreach that we had from the last meeting. We heard a lot of opposition to one-way streets. People were concerned about safety impacts and speeding impacts. We had a lot of concern about wanting to make sure that we heard concerns about prioritizing vehicles over people. We heard a lot about wanting to make sure that we were prioritizing people over cars. We also heard a lot about conflicts between pedestrians and other transportation modes, drivers, bikes, scooters. We heard a lot about narrow sidewalks and maintenance needs and how that can hinder pedestrians. in the neighborhood. Again, we heard enforcement, which is that was a big piece that we've heard throughout the project, but also through the survey and the other outreach. And then we heard concerns about flex posts. This is a historic neighborhood, and some people provided some comments concerned about flex posts and their use for aesthetic reasons. So we'll go through the recommendations. One thing that I should note, I'll note right off the bat, we heard a lot of opposition to one-way streets throughout the draft recommendations. And as we'll go through, you'll notice that none of the final recommendations include any one-way conversion. So we are no longer moving forward on any one-way conversion of any streets at this time. So you will not see that in any of the final recommendations. Happy to answer questions about that, but I want to make sure that that is understood up front as we go through these. So we're going to go through the recommendations. What we're going to do is we'll go through the slides. You'll see what the draft recommendation was, and you'll see where we made changes to them. And then if there's a parking impact, you'll see that. And then you'll see the cost estimate. So we'll go through those. So the first one is 28th between P and M, 27th between P and Olive, and then 28th and P Streets Northwest. And this graphic is, this is the intersection of 28th and P Street. We'll have a rendering for every single recommendation, so you see what things look like. So what we'll be doing here, the recommendation was to implement a curb extension and a striping plan on these streets with signs and flex posts, and then the curb extension of 20th and P, which are shown here. The update is we can certainly implement this without flex posts if that is something that residents are concerned about. We're also, so this is what the recommendation will look like at 28th and P, which is the key intersection in this part of the neighborhood. We also looked at speed humps, where we can install speed humps on these blocks, and these are the blocks where we can install speed humps. So 27th between Dumbarton and O, 28th between M and Olive, and then 28th between N and Dumbarton. Those are places where we can put speed humps on these streets. That was another thing we heard support for speed humps in the comments that we received. Moving on to the next one, Olive between 27th and 28th, and then the intersection. So this is one that, again, we could put in these curb extensions, the striping and the signage changes without flex posts. And then also we'll be putting a speed hump on Olive between 28th and 27th. That's something that we've reviewed and is feasible to put in. Bank Alley Northwest, our original recommendation here was to restrict all left turns at this intersection. But we took a look, and I think what we're going to do for the is restrict left turns out of Bank Alley. So from Bank to M, restrict that left turn, but people would still be able to make the left turn from M Street to Bank Alley. We heard some concern about the need to use this connection for some West Georgetown residents especially. So we modified, took another look at this recommendation and then modified it. So only restricting the left turns out is the update. And then another thing is the paving material of the alley. We heard some concerns about the need to improve pedestrian safety, which we certainly agree with and understand. The issue with Bank Alley and this kind of gray crosswalk is this is kind of bricks and other kind of materials that make it hard for us to put down markings or kind of put anything that would come up pretty easily. So something we'd have to keep coming up and maintaining. So one thing we're looking as is, and flex posts is the same thing. It's a little harder to affix them to bricks or to these other materials than it is to asphalt. So what we're going to be doing is we're looking at other Other things that we could put in this alley to improve pedestrian safety other than a flex post, so maybe a planter box or some other installation. So that's something that we're looking at Bank Alley. Wisconsin Reservoir, 32nd. So the proposed improvement was to update the intersection signal coordination, signs, put in automated enforcement, and then markings to curb extensions at intersections. So, and this is one that, again, we could do without flex posts and just put the markings in. So that's what that one looks like. Wisconsin and P, this one is to kind of improve visibility at this intersection and also to make sure that larger vehicles can make this turn. It's kind of at an angle, you know, it's not at a 90-degree angle. So anytime we have these intersections at streets, there can be issues with visibility and then issues with turning. So for this one, we'll be making this slight change to P Street so that vehicles coming off of P it's more of a 90-degree here for them, kind of teeing up this intersection a little bit. But what this does mean is this will impact one parking space because we're moving the lanes down a bit. One parking space, the one closest to Wisconsin, needs to be repurposed. So we've kind of highlighted that here to show you what that looks like. And as far as I know, we've heard concerns about parking loss. This kind of one we can't do without taking the parking space, so it's all it's kind of all together. So we certainly took that comment to heart, but putting this in does require removing the parking space. 29th K Rock Creek Parkway. First of all, we've used aerial maps to do a number of these, and this one we've got the Whitehurst Freeway over it. So apologize if this doesn't look as pretty as the other ones, but this one here is to restrict left turns coming out of 29th Street. So we will be putting flex posts across just to make sure that reinforce this existing turning restriction on 29th Street and K. We're also going to be putting a curb extension here to tighten these turns and to create a little bit more safety here. But this is what this one looks like. So restricting, again, the existing restriction, but making sure that people cannot make this left turn out of 29. And Potomac, we've got an existing Safe Routes to School project that's going on, so we'll be continuing to coordinate with them. And another thing that we'll be doing is putting curb extensions on Potomac Street. Potomac Street is paved with asphalt, so we can put the markings on here and they'll stay better than on O Street, which is cobblestone. So we're putting curb extensions on Potomac Street and then coordinating with updating signs and then coordinating with the Safe Routes to School project. Q and 32nd, we heard concerns about visibility at this intersection. 32nd is narrow and it's kind of slopes down at Q, and there's some buildings that are really close by that can challenge visibility at this intersection. So to provide a little bit more visibility, shorten these crossings, we're putting in curb extensions. And again, this is one that we can do without flex posts. Key Bridge onto Whitehurst Freeway. This one, we've heard concerns about cars turning off of the Key Bridge onto the Whitehurst Freeway, onto this ramp, making this turn too fast. So we've put some flex posts here to tighten that intersection and to make sure that cars making that turn make that a little slower, and to increase the crossing mobility here. So that's that recommendation. M in Wisconsin, the two busiest streets in the neighborhood. We did hear comments from a number of groups, including the Citizens Association of Georgetown, as far as putting in support for a pedestrian looked at that and done some analysis for that, and we'll be continuing to do other analysis. That's, you know, a kind of a big change. So we'll be continuing to look at that as part of the bus priority project. There may be some kind of trade-offs that may need to happen for that, which we've kind of begun to brainstorm. But again, it's something that we'll continue to look at, but we know that we have heard resident support for putting that in. So we want to kind of keep that on the table as we go into the next project. Also included in here is adjusting this bike and scooter parking area south of the intersection to improve visibility, expanding bus stop zones, and then also adding a curb extension. This is Blues Alley, and then this is the, there's a parking garage here. So we'll be putting a curb extension at that parking garage to provide a little more safety for that. So that's that recommendation. Wisconsin and N. What we're doing here is updating signs and markings, adding no right turn on red signage. So putting that in this recommendation as well. Also looking at these crosswalks across Wisconsin and these streeteries that are the streetery and the sidewalk extension that are really in the intersection, looking at making adjustments to those to improve visibility at this intersection. Recommendation 35th and Dent will be putting in curb extensions at this intersection, also expanding the bus stop. Right now, when the bus stops, it could block this crosswalk. So we want to make sure that the bus has enough space to stop without blocking this crosswalk. So we'll be expanding this bus stop. In order to do that, we will need to repurpose the parking spaces. We also looked at installing a signal here or a rectangular rapid flashing beacon or something. It didn't meet the warrant for that. We also looked at adding the crosswalk on the north side, but there's some existing infrastructure in the way that complicates that. So keeping the bus stop where it is, but expanding it, keeping the existing crosswalks and not putting in a crosswalk on the north side for now is the update to this recommendation. 37T, we looked at some additional markings, and this is another one that only has a crosswalk on one side. We looked at adding a crosswalk down here. Again, there was some existing infrastructure that kind of got in the way and complicated that. We looked at moving the bus stop, but again, we're going to keep this bus stop where it is, but expand it to standard. Right now, there really is not a lot of space between where the bus sign is and where the parking starts. So we'll be repurposing some parking at this location to make sure that the bus has enough room to fully pull into the stop. And then we'll be putting a curb extension on the east side of 35th Street. So we'll be putting that in to improve safety and to shorten this crosswalk. Reservoir and 36. We will be, there's two nearby schools here. This school here, school here. So we'll be putting in a rectangular rapid flashing beacon to improve safety and to help people cross Reservoir here. So we'll be putting that in. So that is, so that on for both crosswalks, and then a curb extension on 36. Moving on to the next one. And we're happy to go through these I'll go back to any of these during question and answer if there are questions on any of them. We'll be, so this is 28th M, Pennsylvania, 29th. We'll be redesigning this intersection to reduce conflicts. So updating markings, adding signs. And then this is the one where we can put a little bit more parking on the north side of north side of M Street here, excuse me. And then also extending the bus stop, or I'm sorry, the bike lane, all the way to 28th Street. And this is one that we had to make some revisions because 28th and 29th, we did have a recommendation to make these one way, which we're not moving forward on. So because we're not moving forward on that, we had to make some adjustments to this recommendation. But this is what it looks like. So okay, moving on. And between Wisconsin, right here at Wisconsin, we've heard a lot of concerns about this intersection, about this block. I'm sorry. It's kind of residential for most of it, but then as you get to Wisconsin, there's a couple of commercial properties kind of at this end of it. So we've heard a lot of concerns about congestion of this block. We've heard from some residents who support converting this block to one-way westbound. We did look at that, and the analysis didn't support it. We also kind of heard from some residents who live around, maybe not on the block, but around the block, who I think would be less supportive of a one-way conversion. So the way we're going to be moving forward with now is we are going to be implementing a loading zone during periods of higher loading demand during the day. So kind of during the day, this area, right now there's 4 metered parking spaces that will convert to a loading zone during the day. And then at night, it will be available for metered parking. And then once that loading zone is implemented, this is one of the locations that we heard a lot of concerns about enforcement. So what we're going to be doing first is we're going to be putting in the loading zone. There will be a notice of intent released. So there'll be a formal comment period for VAC and for residents and everybody to weigh in on it. And then we'll take all those comments and review them. And then if we do still decide to go forward with the loading zone after getting those comments and reviewing that, we'll put it out on the street, and then we'll work with partner agencies, mainly the Department of Public Works, DPW, to increase parking enforcement. So that we're putting this new loading zone out, and we want our partner agency to work with us to make sure that people know that like this is a new thing. So so we think this will be a first kind of step to make improvements on this block, and we're happy to work with the ANC, the BID, the businesses, residents, everybody to continue to monitor this location and see how this loading zone works. 33rd, 34th, 35th, we heard between Wisconsin and M, we heard a lot of concerns about congestion during peak hours, getting from Wisconsin to M. So we did look at a change to existing traffic patterns, and our analysis didn't support making any of those changes, but they did support making a couple of changes to some of these M Street intersections. So at 33rd and M, some adjustments to signal timing, and then at M and 34th, implementing a no turn on red, and then updating the turning lanes at 34th where it comes to M Street. We also did look at Wisconsin 35th, all kind of way on the other end of this part of the neighborhood, and that ended up not being supported. There were some turning movements that made it hard to move forward with that. But we are still recommending these M Street improvements. The next two are S Street and T Street. The draft recommendation was to convert T Street to one-way westbound and then S to one-way eastbound, so to have a one-way pair in the neighborhood. Again, we didn't get support for that. A lot of the concerns about one-way conversions this is the location that we got that. But what we can do is to improve safety, we're putting speed humps on S Street. T Street for a couple of reasons, short blocks. There's a bus on T Street, so you can't put speed humps. You need to put a speed table, which is a little different. We weren't able to do that on T Street, but on S Street, we were able to recommend speed humps. So that's the updated recommendation for S. 28th, 29th, we heard a lot of, so the initial recommendation for this was to convert 29th to one-way southbound and 28th to one-way northbound. We heard a lot of concerns. I'd say the biggest opposition to one-way conversions was on 28th and 29th. So instead, we're not going to move forward with that. There are some blocks on 28th that we shared previously, 28th between M and Olive. I believe there's another I can cycle back on 28th Street where we can. I think N and Dumbarton is the other one where we can put a speed hump on 28th. So we will be putting some speed humps on some of these blocks. The blocks between P and R, we also heard some concerns from some residents who live north of P about speeding concerns, because initially the recommendation was only to P, but we looked at these blocks all the way up to R, and we can put speed humps on those blocks to the calm traffic, those blocks. So also I'll mention 28th between M and Olive. There's a couple of restaurants there. It's, just the block that's right off of M Street. So people that are turning off, that's the first block they go on. We've heard a lot of concerns about double parking and speeding and, drivers parking too close to intersections, and just a lot of activity during the day, but also, overnight. There's a restaurant there that's open until very late in the late at night. So we've heard a lot of concerns on that block. So one of the things that we can do, in addition to putting a speed hump on 28th between M and Olive, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be updating all the signage on that block. So that, I know that sounds like a small thing, but it's really important because we're going to be addressing conflicting signage. So that means that the Department of Public Works come out there and they can do enforcement, because if there's a conflict between signs, a ticket can be dismissed. And the Department of Public Works doesn't want to go out and do enforcement if all the work that they do to write tickets is they're just going to get dismissed. So we're going to fix all those conflicts of signage on that block between M and Olive. And then we are going to notify DPW, the Department of Public Works, DPW, and get them to do some increased enforcement on that block. So again, it's an iterative process, kind of similar to that block of N Street. It's an iterative process. We'll try something. We'll follow up with residents, the ANC, to see how it's working, and then see what's going on, and then go from there. But those are the kind of first step for M and Olive. This is our last recommendation. This is a new recommendation. We heard from some residents of the block 31st between Q and R Street. Heard a lot of concerns from residents on this block. We went out and did a site visit with them. So heard concerns about speeding and other activity. This is another block where we can put speed humps on. Kind of north of Avon Lane, we can put a couple of speed humps here. We'll be putting curb extensions at the Q and R Street intersections to help kind of slow drivers down as they're going through them. And then also Avon Lane doesn't have a stop sign at 31st, so we're putting a stop sign at Avon Lane, so to kind of improve visibility and safety at that intersection. The last kind of is an update to M Street, Wisconsin Avenue. Through this study, we also analyzed a permanent removal of the rush hour restrictions. The analysis that we did shows that that removal has little impact to the network, but there was a reduction of crashes by 60%. So during COVID, DDOT suspended the rush hour restrictions. We did some data collection before, some data collection after, and then analyzed that data, and that showed that the crashes have dropped by 60%. DDOT will be initiating a bus priority project. So that's a longer term project that will explore corridor-wide changes in Wisconsin, and some things that may come out of that. Could be expanded sidewalks, bus lanes, bike lanes, streeteries, that will all be addressed through the bus priority project. Also, I mentioned the pedestrian-only phase, or the Barnes Dance at Emmon, Wisconsin. That will be further considered as part of the bus priority project. And that is anticipated to kick off in our next fiscal year. So it'll either start late 2024 or early 2025. Our bus team will be back in the community. And this is the graph that shows the crash reduction from before the rush hour restrictions on parking were before, and then after they were suspended. So this shows the huge drop in crashes, both for total, but also injury crashes dropped, pedestrian crashes dropped, bicycle crashes dropped, showing that the suspension of the rush hour parking restrictions on Emmon, Wisconsin had a major benefit to safety in the neighborhood. Okay, so next steps. What happens after the study concludes? So next month, I mentioned we will be publishing our final study report that will detail all these recommendations. But after that happens, we'll be submitting work orders to implement them. Most of them won't need a notice of intent. That doesn't mean that we're not going to do them without checking in with the community. We're happy to, reach out to the ANC and other members of the community as we implement these. In some cases, it might just be a heads up, you're good, please do it. In others, it might be, hey, there's some questions, residents still have some concerns. We're happy to work through those. Whatever the comments are, we're happy to work through them. The goal is to implement all recommendations within the next 2 to 3 years. I did mention the amount of budget that we have, which we can use to advance not just striping and markings, but actually building the curbs. That is a higher price than all the cost estimates that you saw previously is just for markings and sign changes. But as we go through and we implement them, we'll be looking at them and see, could we do these by moving curbs and actually doing some construction and not having that be a huge lift or a bigger lift than it can normally be. So we'll be using that budget to implement those and to seeing where we can make the permanent changes. And again, we'll keep the community updated as we do that analysis and do that review. Also, the rush hour parking restrictions, currently it's still under a temporary suspension. We are going to do a permanent removal of the rush hour parking restrictions with a new signage plan on Emmon, Wisconsin that will be updated, implementing later this year. The existing sidewalk extensions and streeteries that are on those streets will remain in place. The bid has a permit that is still active until next year. So those will stay, at least through that permit. And then the bus priority project, again, is anticipated to kick off in fiscal year 2025. And again, just because it says bus priority, that project will consider multimodal improvements and will develop cross sections of streets. So, you'll see what the street could look like at certain spots, so that residents can evaluate those and kind of see what they will look like. There we are. Okay, so we're going to get to the Q&A in a little bit, but before I do so, I do want to let you know about our Title VI surveys. This is how we work with the federal DOT, the U.S. Department of Transportation, to make sure that our meetings are as accessible as possible. And you are not required to fill this out, but we really do encourage you to fill it out. It helps us make sure that our meetings are as good as they can be. So this is really crucial feedback that we would ask you to fill out. After the WebEx ends, you'll be directed to fill one of these out. So don't worry about doing it now. But we do want to present this to you. Again, you're not required to do it, but we really do encourage you to do it, and it would really help us out. So we will go ahead and open up the question and answer period. So Jamal, do you want to kind of go through and start leading that?
Yes, perfect and amazing. Thank you for that presentation. And as a reminder, feel free to raise your hand if you have any questions to come off mute, or you can drop them in the Q&A chat by pressing the three dots at the bottom right of your screen. So first question, Ted, is regarding recommendation number 22 and sort of the timeline around that. So as you're flicking back to that one, the question was, what's the timeline for that updated parking signage on 28th?
We had a meeting just last week on this. So I think it's something that we'll be doing relatively soon. Hopefully in the next few months, if not sooner. But we'll be continuing to update our the ANC and the residents on this. But I think that's something that we would do relatively quickly, because that's, we've got a lot of concerns on that, and it's a yeah. So in the next couple of months, I would say.
Amazing. Thank you, Ali, for that question. Next one is more so a comment, but Ted, if you want to add anything to this, the comment from Kevin is, I really wish that DDOT would do something at the Rock Creek Parkway exit on P Street Northwest. There are 3 crosswalks there with limited visibility, and drivers consistently do not stop at stop signs. So that's more of a comment, but anything you want to address there, Ted?
Yeah, we can certainly follow up on that location. So feel free to reach out and we can follow up with you.
Amazing. Thank you, Kevin. Okay, cool. There's a next question in the chat. Has anyone proposed no parking on 28th between M and Olive? The restaurants, the embassies, the Uber Eats drivers seem to be causing the clog.
I think our first step is to address the conflicting signage. There's also some residences on that block. So I think restricting all of the parking, I think some of the residents who live on that block would probably, or who live nearby, would have some concerns about that. So again, I think our first step is to address the conflicting signage, so that when DPW does come out to do enforcement, that those tickets stick. So that's kind of, and also we will be putting a speed hump on that block. So that's, I think, kind of the first step towards, I know that there's a lot of concerns on that block that if we had a magic wand to wave all those issues away, we would, but that's unfortunately not in our toolbox. We kind of have to do an iterative approach for this, but we do think that this is a really key first step to making things better on that block.
Amazing. Thank you, Ted. And reminder, folks, if you have a question, you can use the raise hand feature at the bottom middle of your screen. Or if you cannot come off mute to ask your question verbally, you can share your question by pressing the bottom 3 dots bottom three dots to the right of your screen, and drop in your question in the Q&A. There's a question from Stephanie. Have you considered the transportation issues on South Street between Wisconsin and 31st Street? Several residents added comments to the survey on this, but don't see it addressed.
Yeah, I mean, we don't have a recommendation there at the moment. I think we can follow up on that and see what the requests are. Go through the comments we've already received, but if somebody wants to reach out and provide more information on that, certainly let us know, and we can see how either through the study or through another effort how DDOT can address those issues.
Amazing. Thank you, Ted. There are currently no other questions. Folks, if you have a question, feel free to raise your hand. And thank you, Stephanie, for that. But folks, if you have a question, feel free to raise your hand or drop your question in the Q&A. There's a question.
Actually, Jamal, I am going to quickly just share my contact information. If anyone has questions on the study or on DDOT, if I can't answer your question, I'm happy to refer you to one of my many colleagues. But that is all of that's my email and phone. And then also this is the website for the study where all the information is on there for the study. All the meeting materials. There's a lot of information there, so I want to make sure that people have that as well.
Amazing. For those that are watching, that are listening in and can't necessarily see the screen, the website is engage.dc.gov/Georgetown study. There's a question from Bill in the chat. Knowing that traffic flow is a problem on 34th Street, wouldn't a no turn on red cause further delays?
Sorry, Jamal, could you repeat that?
Yep, it's a question around sort of traffic flow and sort of no right turn on red on 34th Street. So the question was, knowing that traffic flow is a problem on 34th, wouldn't a no turn on red cause further delays?
So I think in this location, we want to make sure that we're kind of balancing traffic flow, but also safety. So that's the thought behind that recommendation, is to, both are certainly important, but that's kind of the thought between that recommendation, is kind of balancing those two needs, as much as possible.
Amazing. There's a question in the chat from Gwendolyn. Are rush hour lanes being removed on M in Wisconsin before you come into Georgetown?
So this study only looked at M in Wisconsin within Georgetown. So that's all that we're going to be implementing. But we're happy to, when that effort happens or before that effort happens, we're happy to notify the community and have, just so that people, know that it's happening. And then if there are any kind of questions at that time, we can certainly address them. But as of now, the only thing that we'll be implementing is within Georgetown.
Amazing. Thank you, Gwendolyn, for that question. All right. Next question is from Ellie regarding recommendation 1 and 8.
Let me cycle to that as you ask. Okay.
Perfect. Where will the speed bumps be on 28th if located mid-block along where the slide said Olive and M through M?
So for all of these, we looked at every single block on 27th and 28th and 29th to see where we could put speed humps. And based on our kind of speed hump guidelines, all of these blocks are really narrow. So as far as putting a speed hump, it needs to be a certain distance from the intersection. And then there can't be a driveway in the a drain, or really any other street infrastructure can make it not possible. So for all of these, it'll be pretty much right in the middle of the block. For 28th between M and Olive, it will be north of the, there's a driveway for a condo. It'll be north of that, of that condo driveway on that block.
Amazing. All right, there's another question in the chat. And from Emmy, how will the M in Wisconsin corners accommodate all the people who will accumulate there while waiting for an all-way pedestrian crossing light?
Yeah, that is certainly something that we would need to work through as we continue to evaluate that. That's something that we've already kind of brought up ourselves and, and started to think about. So I think more to come on that. That will the pedestrian only phase will be further evaluated as far as the bus priority project, but that certainly is a key thing that we'll be thinking about is, where will there be enough space for pedestrians to wait, and how can we, if we do move forward with the barn stance or a pedestrian only phase, how do we accommodate that?
There's a question in the chat from Bill. Thank you, Bill. Are you proposing a loading zone on N Street at Wisconsin? Isn't the street too narrow for trucks?
I mean, the street currently has truck traffic on it. We think that putting the loading zone will provide the trucks a place to load. We heard comments and concerns, and we were out there with residents and we saw it. Trucks double parking to unload. So we think that providing a dedicated loading spot on this block will provide the trucks a place so that they're not double parking and they're not blocking traffic. So that's we believe that implementing this will improve things on this block.
Perfect. Any other questions? Feel free to drop them in the chat or raise your hand. Use the Q&A function at the bottom right of your screen.
Yeah, if anyone wants to speak, we certainly appreciate the comments, but don't be shy if you have a question. We'd love to hear from you as well.
Yep, don't be shy. And Ted, maybe you can go back to the contact slide for folks who may have to hop. Any other questions, folks? Thank you. Oh, here's one. Amazing. Thank you, James, for the question. At what point would you decide to implement flex posts now that you have removed it from a number of recommendations?
Yeah, we certainly heard a lot of concerns about, certainly some people, do support putting in flex posts in Georgetown, but we did hear from some people who really do oppose them for aesthetic reasons. So I think there's a number of things we can do. I think we can certainly put some of these things in without flex posts, at least at first. And then if that is not performing at a level that we and that DDOT and the residents would like to see, we can certainly follow up from that. Maybe, in some cases, residents will change their mind about flex posts. If they say, this striping isn't really working, I might be more open to flex posts. So I think that certainly is, a maybe. We can also look at other things that would serve a similar function to flex posts, but maybe more aesthetically pleasing, whether it's a planter box or something else. The thing about the planter boxes is DDOT wouldn't maintain them. So, we wouldn't be planting flowers and updating the flowers in the parking box. We'd look for a community partner to do that. So that's kind of an important thing about that. And then I also mentioned the budget that we have. Another thing that we could do is see if we can put in permanent curb extensions at that location instead. So I think that's kind of something that we'll kind of tackle as we implement these. Maybe some residents are, maybe, one resident one group of residents around one intersection is really against flex posts and others are more open to it. We know that a bike share station went in on 33rd Street just at Wisconsin, and that's a new bike share location with flex posts. So that certainly that's something that we can certainly explore with residents as we implement things.
Amazing. And there was a follow-up question around clearly on that flex post. Does DDOT have the right to implement flex posts without going through the historical review process for these transportation tools?
So as we implement,
I can answer it. Sorry, I can answer it. Yes, DDOT does, because it's considered a safety feature. And so we do have approval to put these in. What we're trying to do is respond to the concerns. And it's overall, it's just citywide. What we're trying to do is make these permanent with permanent features from the get-go, and looking at doing that from the start or coming back and making the curbs real curbs. So it's a real infrastructure project. But yes, we do have the right to put them in historic areas, but we were just trying, overall, it's a new DDOT policy. We're trying to reduce the use of flex posts all across the city.
Amazing. Thank you, Anna. There's another question in the chat. And just for a reminder, folks who cannot stay on but may have questions, again, you can reach out and contact Ted, but also there will be another community meeting tomorrow if you want to come and ask questions tomorrow at 6:30 at St. John's Church. We'll be sure to share more about that. But there's a question in the chat around sort of consideration to be given to longer pedestrian ways. So I guess it's more of a comment. Could more considerations be given to longer pedestrian ways?
I think I'd like to know more about what location you had in mind. I'm not sure exactly what you mean by longer pedestrian ways. But if you want to, my information is right there. If you want to follow up with me, I'm happy to follow up.
Okay. And my assumption is I heard Emmy's questions got cut off. So the full question is here. Could some consideration be given to longer pedestrian walk signs at M and 33rd and M in Wisconsin? 19 seconds is way too short. Comment. I have serious reservations about more streeteries impinging on Wisconsin Avenue, as some who uses the buses and also walks a lot. It is like an obstacle course. So I guess the question first, longer pedestrian walk signs at M and 33rd and then on M in Wisconsin.
Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, we do have to take another look at the signal timing at M and 33rd. So perhaps there could be more time for pedestrians in that intersection. But DDOT goes through DDOT goes through looking at kind of all the signals in a neighborhood, because you can't, for the most part, you can't make a change to one without affecting the other. So we look at these kind of as a corridor perspective, and that's something that we look to do throughout the city to make improvements to make improvements to traffic flow, and also to make improvements to add more time to pedestrians where we can. So that's something that DDOT is always doing throughout the district. So thank you for that. And again, that's something we'd evaluate as part of the pedestrian-only phase. You know, it might be the case that after more analysis, the pedestrian-only phase may not be feasible at Edmond, Wisconsin, but that may not end up being feasible, but there may be changes that we could do to either provide more timing or to add curb extensions, which would then shorten the crosswalks, the distance that you need to travel. So, so more to come in the bus priority project. Stay tuned.
Ted, this is Sky. I would like to say that for the pedestrian only phase, like what we implement in the 7th and H, while we have the pedestrian only phase, we also can have the original pedestrian phase parallel to the through traffic, such as on Wisconsin Avenue. So you will not lose your pedestrian crossing time when the your parallel traffic is also on green. So so we will explore different options in signals if we're gonna move to pedestrian only phase.
Thank you.
Perfect. And there's a next question in the chat. Why is newly added bike lane on north side of M Street ending at 28th Street, 28th and M Street, not connected to bike lane on Rose Park? Isn't it unsafe to just end the bike lane on such a busy intersection?
Well, currently the bike lane ends before the intersection. So this recommendation would get it to the intersection. And then our strategic bike plan, which is coming up, could look at further improvements throughout the neighborhood. And I think this would be a key location that they would have their eye on. So I would say I'd encourage you to continue to engage through the strategic bike plan when that kicks off.
Thank you, Ted. There's a question in the chat around sort of the influx of scooters on sidewalks. You mentioned pedestrian safety, making sidewalks safer. What is DDOT going to do about the proliferation of scooters that are cluttering out sidewalks, especially on Wisconsin and M streets?
Yeah, thanks for that question. So, you know, our teams who work on scooters are always looking for locations that where we can put more scooter parking at locations, and that's something that we could do right at the intersection. And that's another thing that we could do as part of these curb extensions is, you know, where all of these places where we said we were putting curb extensions, you know, those could be candidates for putting in-street racks for places for people to park their scooters. I will say that our teams who put those racks, when they put them in street, they have to put flex posts in with them as well. So, you know, I think that's something that we will work with residents as we implement. Maybe a resident who opposes flex posts, but also is concerned about scooter parking. You know, maybe if we present, you know, we can put scooter parking at this intersection, but it also will come with flex posts. Maybe we can get support for that. You know, maybe, you know, somebody will get, you know, one thing they like and then one thing they don't. So again, there's a number of things that we can work through with residents as we implement these things. So that's certainly something that we will be keeping an eye on, and we're happy to engage residents on.
Perfect. Thank you, Ted. And then just highlighting the comment received from you, Kevin, around the light timing that needs to be improved at this particular intersection. I think recommendation 17 is what you're recommending, but that comment is received. Perfect. Any other questions?
While we're waiting for, and again, we're happy to. We do want to make sure we get to everyone's questions, but while we're waiting for a few more to come in potentially, I do want to plug our meeting tomorrow. If somebody could drop that into the chat so that people have that information. It also is on our website, engage.dc.gov/Georgetown study. Has all the information for the in-person meeting tomorrow. If you're available, we would love to have you at that meeting as well. And then there's my contact information if you have any questions that you didn't get to answer today or anything that you want to follow up with me on. There's my contact information. And then I also want to plug our Title VI survey. Again, you are not required to fill this out, but we really would love to have you do this for us. So don't forget about this as well.
Amazing. And one question just came in from Philip. When do you anticipate that recommendations 18 will be implemented?
18?
Yes.
Yeah. So our team who works on so this will require a notice of intent, and I think that is something that will happen imminently. I would say either in the next couple of weeks. This is something that we that the community will receive. That will come with a 30-day comment period. So we'll have to have that comment period go through, and then after that comment period happens, we will review all the comments we receive, and then if we still decide to move forward with it, we'll implement it. So that's something that should happen relatively soon. But I can follow up with my colleague who's working on that notice of intent for the loading zone to get an updated timing on that.
Next question is, what is happening with the condo hotel at the end of Water Street under the Whitehurst Freeway? How will that impact traffic up to M Street and down Water towards Rock Creek Parkway?
Cycle for that one. I know that there is the West Heating Plant condo project. I don't know if that's the one that you're referring to or not. If there's another one, certainly let us know or follow up with me. But we did look at, so DDOT looks at all developments through a development review process. And, we look to see what the impacts of development will be, and then balance the impacts with mitigation. So if a development comes in with a big enough impact, DDOT will condition, DDOT will make a recommendation to the zoning commission or the board of zoning approvals, and they will make, and then they're the ones who actually make the condition on what a developer is required to do to mitigate the impacts of their development. So the West Heating condo project, DDOT reviewed it and didn't make any conditions to that any transportation improvements on that, but there are some public space improvements. So the development will be required to update the public space, so the sidewalks and the areas around their space. If you're asking about another development, if you're not asking about the West Heating Plant, follow up with me, and I can refer you to our development review team, and they'll be happy to provide information to you about how we responded to a development, or how, if it's still under review, kind of give you an update on that. So I'd encourage you to reach out to me, and I'll let you follow up with them.
Yeah, and said they were referencing, said that it was the one down on Water Street right under the Key Bridge where the old aqueduct remains are. So
Okay.
it's like Water and 35th. So if that wasn't addressed, to just following up with Ted to make sure that you have specifics around that.
Okay. Again, I'm happy to follow up, and I'll refer to our development review team to make sure we're getting you the most updated information on how DDOT is working through those.
Yeah. And there's a follow-up question from Gwendolyn on the bike lane in and at the intersection. So I'm in 28th Street. A bike lane just in and on this already very busy and congested intersection is extremely dangerous and thus concerning. Where are bikers supposed to go from this intersection?
Yeah, well, right now, again, the bike lane ends before the intersection. So this would at least this recommendation would at least get them to the intersection and there would be a striped buffer, so it would be protected to 28th. So this would be a safety improvement on what is existing today. Again, as far as this would safely get a biker to 28th Street, and then if they wanted to go up 28th into the neighborhood, they could do that. Or they could, but this would at least get them to the intersection, and it would protect their path to the intersection. As far as future improvements, that is our strategic, our bike team will be looking at that through our strategic bike plan, which is kicking off soon.
Amazing. And there was a recommendation from Kevin to add a curb cut into Rose Park. So that is noted. Thank you for sharing.
Okay.
Perfect. If there are any other questions, feel free to come off mute, raise your hand, drop it in the chat. But would also remind folks that tomorrow is also a public meeting, and that information is in the chat around where the meeting is. It's tomorrow, 6:30 at St. John's Church. Feel free to come, or please contact Ted if there are any further questions that you have that may not have been answered tonight. Right. Well, Ted, I think you answered the bulk of questions. I think I'll hand it back over to you unless we want to keep the room open to give folks space to ask any further questions.
Yeah, I mean, I'm seeing that it's just 8, which is when we had scheduled to end the meeting. So I think if we've answered all the questions, we will go ahead and end the meeting. I thank you all for your time and attention today. We will be posting this recording on DDOT's YouTube page, and then we'll also be sharing it. All the materials from today's meeting, all the materials for tomorrow's meeting will all be on the website, and then we'll send an email out to everybody after all the things are up later this week to provide you with all the materials from the meeting. I am happy to stay on if anyone has questions or comments, but otherwise, we thank you for your time today. We hope to see you tomorrow at St. John's Church tomorrow, but otherwise, we thank you for your time today, and thank you.
Thanks all.